Hi, I'm Dr. Randy Bach, and today's September 6th, 2023, and I'm honored to have Brad Skistimas here with me today from 5 Times August. And Brad, tell us about yourself, what 5 Times August is, what your music has been like, and your interests and successes.
Sure. Yeah, so I started 5 Times August right after high school when I was 18. So 5 Times August has already been around for a couple decades, and it's been quite a journey to say the least. Started out like any other singer-songwriter, playing coffee shops, and um, I had sort of my first big break getting a lot of songs licensed to MTV programs and TV commercials and little indie movies here and there and stuff. So once that took hold, I ended up touring the country quite a bit. Played a lot of colleges and universities, spent my entire 20s touring the country with my wife in the van. She pretty much was my manager, booked the shows, did all the business side of things. And I just, I was the artist. And so that's what we did throughout our 20s. Became parents, took some time off from traveling. I started a kids' music project called the Juicebox Jukebox in 2018 for my kids, and did an album and some videos for that. And that's where, like, sort of my heart was right before all the COVID stuff happened, and that's what I was invested in. I kind of had left 5 Times August behind, and then throughout 2020. I had to cancel a whole bunch of stuff for the kids project, and then sort of looking around, wondering where my musical heroes were and what kind of world was shaping up for my kids. And I felt like I really had to say something. So I wrote this song called God Help Us All and released that in January 2021. And I thought that would sort of be my one sort of say on the matter musically, and just sort of vent. And I knew I was going to upset some people that had been following me for a long time, and that did happen. And I lost a lot of fans. And then, but as that was happening, and I was losing that sort of original group of fans, this new group of fans came in, finding this song and saying, thanks for saying this. And it sort of let me know that I wasn't alone in how I felt. And it encouraged me to keep writing, to let other people know they weren't alone. And so over the course of like a year and a half, I had sort of, I went from a children's songwriter, I was doing the kids' music stuff, into this protest artist that I never would have anticipated being. But I had collected about 12 protest songs, and I put them together into an album called Silent War. And, that's sort of the story in a nutshell. Is I've had these little pockets of little versions of who I have been as an artist. And I can tell you, I never anticipated being at the forefront of, this era and being a protest sort of singer ever. But here we are. And I sort of found myself as an artist in that journey along the way.
So I'm old enough to have lived in the 60s. I was born in the 50s, and there was a time when question authority, it was the prototypical bumper sticker on top of your on the back of your VW van, and then baby boomer generation, so forth. When they're in authority, no longer can you question authority. So kind of the Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, give it to the man. That generation has become the man and woman, or whatever, if we can still tell those apart. How is it? And do you find it all ironic that the protest movement is from the other direction politically, essentially? And or is it? Have they been blurred? I mean, who's for what, and what are you for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting looking back, because that's the music that I grew up listening to as well. I mean, my musical interests were based off of finding my parents' record collection growing up. And so, I listened to, and I had a fifth grade teacher who listened to oldies radio during class, and that introduced me to a whole bunch of that music from that era. So I grew up listening to that while a lot of, kids were listening to Nirvana and grunge bands and stuff like that. I was listening to, the Beatles and Buddy Holly and, all these other older artists, and Bob Dylan for that matter, And I think when you look back on it, it's been interesting because if you've grown up with that music, you sort of put them as this figure in your life, and they're always older and more mature. And as I've surpassed the ages, I'm 40 now, and so when I look back at the Beatles in their prime, or Bob Dylan in their prime, or Joni Mitchell, they were kids. They were in their 20s, and we've made them out to be these icons, but really they were kids just as much as anybody in mainstream pop music today is just a young person trying to appeal to a young crowd. And I think what has happened over the last 50, 60 years is that those original legacy artists have sort of just been commercialized and branded, and they became a t-shirt that you would buy in Target, and they sort of became the antithesis of what it was that they were speaking out to. But the truth is they grew up, and they realized that they weren't really against the man so much. They signed enough contracts and ended up in this sort of commercial world. But the lines have been blurred for sure. It's almost like because I started saying this a couple years ago. I was like, the most rock and roll thing you could be at this point is a conservative, because I think that what has happened is that, and I had this conversation yesterday, is if you look at the incremental push, the push to push the boundaries, like you go all the way to, say, Elvis shaking his hips on TV, and it's like, whoa, he's shaking his hips, we can't let the kids see that. And then the 60s, the boys are growing their hair out longer, and we've got hippies coming up, and whoa, and then it pushes, each generation pushed it to the point to where now we have Cardi B singing WAP, and we have Lil Nas X lap dancing with the devil in his music videos, and it's getting pushed so much that it's not even shocking anymore. That I think that you tip over an edge into, or you at least come full circle to the other side, to where now people are seeking something more pure and honest with meaning, something that's faith-based. You're seeing like this reaction to it, right? Where we've butted up against the edge of culture's shock value, and we're turning a corner now, I think.
I know. I don't know where the corners are anymore. It's just, I always expect that. I always expect it's going to be one of these, kind of rubber band or boomerang things. And, and in the cartoons, gravity's sort of defied. I used to, love the Roadrunner, and Wile E. Coyote, would run out, over the cliff. He'd get fooled and he'd be out on the cliff, and then, he'd kind of look around. It wasn't until he looked down that that he would fall. And all the conventions, you think it's like, oh, the rubber band's going to flip back, but you're doing your own cartoon. It seems to me that the rules have all been kind of shaded and changed, so that when you are essentially the Bob Dylan figure now, and giving it to the man and whatnot, the same people who grew up on that, who respect that and who question authority, don't. And so how's that played out for your well, I'll just ask a very simple question. You're a dad, and a husband, a family man. How does that translate to the bottom line? Do you support yourself? Can you? Are things better or worse? Where do things go, and how do you manage? I assume you don't get picked up by major record labels.
No, not at all. I mean, I had those conversations, over a decade ago, and when I was coming up, because I think when you start out as an up and coming artist, you have this idea, this vision of what your career is going to look like. And back then, it was very traditional. I'm going to get my major label deal and have my single on the radio and get my Grammy award, it will be on the cover of Rolling Stone. You have all these like sort of stereotypical ideas of things. And my career trajectory went nowhere in that direction. I mean, by the time I was meeting with record labels, major record labels, I didn't really even want anything to do with them, because the industry was changing so much, and I just didn't feel like I wanted to play that game. So I've been an indie artist, pretty much my entire career. And I figured out how to make a living at it. I figured out how it's not just being a songwriter, it's running a business. It's learning how to make your own website and make your own merchandise and book your own tours. And there's so many different little facets to it. But the tools are in place nowadays. So, when I started out, we were just at the beginning of that sort of thing, where the internet was becoming a really important tool for indie artists. And, by the time we reached this point, and I knew I was taking a risk by speaking out, that was scary. I've said this many times, but what I would say to my wife was, I'm either burning down everything I've worked for, or I'm building something new. And I had no idea if I was building something new. I didn't feel I was building anything new until probably about, I don't know, 5 or 6 songs into it. I could really actually tell there was something here. There was a hunger for this kind of honesty in music, because that was my whole approach. I was like, I'm just going to sit down with my guitar and record the song as a performance and capture a moment and, give people something true and real and a real performance. It's not polished. We didn't go into, I recorded those songs out of my bedroom, and they're just performances. And I wanted to give the most real thing that I could. And the reaction to it, honestly, surprised me over the course of putting those songs out, because every time I put one out, I would get a new group of people discovering it, saying thank you. And they would be not just in my state, not just in America, but from all around the world. And that was really eye-opening to me, was to realize, like, this really was a worldwide situation. And the silver lining of it all is that things like this have brought us closer together, have brought the people that felt ousted from all this are now together.
Yeah, no, I used the example, my kids are men now. They're just a little bit younger than you. But the Harry Potter sorting hat, we had friends, my wife has probably more friends than I do. But we had, communal friends as couple and family and whatnot. And as the kids have gone out of the house, it's more just couples. And, the COVID became this schism, almost like, Martin Luther, brought it about the big schism in the church. And I'm sure there've been many others, where people, decided camps. And the Harry Potter sorting hat, you wind up at Hogwarts, and you are either, they divine that you are either a Slytherin or a Huff and Puff, or I want to say Dumbledore, but I know that's a guy. But anyway, the third college there, and they figure that out. But that happened here as well. We tried to maintain a semblance of real life, and I think that life requires people to see each other, but both full facially and be convivial and collegial and conjoint, and life is a matter of talking things out. And anyway, blah blah blah. So we had dinner parties, and we had them outside. We had heaters and all that kind of stuff. So we were, but there was one kind of breaking moment where there's an indoor tennis pavilion, and a bunch of us played, and somebody put it up on Facebook, a selfie of all of us, and everybody was, like shocked that this could happen. And this was, way after the, big bursts that in the spring of 2020, I think it was late 2020 or something like that. And, how could you? And it became this huge, not for me, but for the, for the women, it was, in the photo and their friends, this became a huge moment. I'm not sure the guys really cared one way or another. We kind of go along. We don't make the social occasions, but this became a big thing. And it had, kind of not just ripples. On the social base, it was more like a tsunami, without exaggerating. That is exaggerating, but, there's been a whole kind of resorting of whom you have and can count on as friends and contacts, and for better, for worse. So, maybe you just find out things about people, in wartime and whatnot, like who's going to, during the Nazis, whatever, who's going to harbor, a refugee, a Jew or something like that, and who's not, and who's going to, obey their conscience, and who's not. And you have, if you feel comfortable talking about that, how do you find your conscience? Does everyone have one? Do we all have a soul? How do people ignore it, or did you find it in a certain way that other people should? How do a bunch of people not come to the same conclusion you have?
That's a tough one. I mean, I have no idea, because prior to 2020, I had this sort of idea that humanity was sitting at a baseline understanding where, like, not to trust the government, not to trust the news and everything you see on TV. We're supposed to all sort of understand that, right? And throughout 2020, this naive notion that we did fell beneath me, and I was like, are you kidding me? Like, we're really going along with this, right? And people that you've known your whole life, people that you look up to, people that are close to your friends, all of a sudden you're going, you too, and they're looking at you thinking, how could you, and it's something happened there. But I think that it's I don't know what it is other than just a God-given awareness of things. It's just your intuition, and some people have it and some people don't. We used to call it common sense, but I don't know if it was really ever that common, is sort of the joke of it all. But I tapped in, I don't know. It was just sort of, we got to this point really where, my oldest son was injured by his early childhood vaccine. So we've been down the vaccine rabbit hole for a really long time, for 10 years prior to COVID. So once, we saw COVID and everything, we were like, they're going to introduce a shot. We saw it coming like a mile away. And so that was already in our ether. We were sort of aware of we're in the medical freedom community, essentially, and most people aren't. Most people, I think that has a lot to do with it, is the pace at which our life is going, that the system is designed. It's to keep you too distracted to even question what's happening. And I mean, that's why you sort of, as early parents, we first-time parents, we found ourselves in that situation with our oldest. We're just going along, and you just trust what the doctor says here, and you just do. You don't question, you just do. And I think that's, for most people, that's what it is. I think that when you're so deep down the rabbit hole of this situation in particular, even it's hard to remember that most people aren't even around the edge of it. They're 1,000 miles that way, and they have no clue, because they're just trying to get through the day and pay the bills, get the kids to school, get to work, and come home and have a decent dinner. And so it's just a lot, I think, to take in. And most people don't. I know people that would rather just not talk about it. They just don't even want to.
I understand that. Yeah, I'm part of a congregation, and I'm one of the officers, and there was, things happened as they do, and so, we have our own little micro bursts, I guess, not tsunamis, and I'm pretty verbal, and I write letters about the stuff, and I try to put a reasonable stamp on it, such that if you looked at it from 2-3 years from now, you don't understand what the situation is. So, I verbalize the thing, and everyone's like, we had a barbecue, and everyone's like, oh my God, those are great letters, blah, 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 the guys. And a woman came up to me and said, you cannot do that anymore. I can't stand, the tension. You bring these things up, I get it, and they're issues and so forth, but I just can't bear hearing about them. And it's like, well, I mean, I don't know what the choices are. I mean, there's no real good choice there, because, putting your head in the sand is not a great choice. So kind of backtracking, you're mentioning medical freedom. What is the medical freedom movement? What is that? How did it play out, in the before times? And by the way, it was Gryffindor. I couldn't remember.
Sure. So we, my wife, once our son was having a reaction, she became probably the most brilliant Google mom that you would, that you would ever know. And she's really very smart about it. And she was telling me all about sort of things that she was finding out over the years. And they would come into my ether, and I would like, oh, okay, that, like, it's good to be aware of it. But, I was too distracted myself until, and we were following Children's Health Defense and watching, Del Bigtree show and all that other stuff. We were sort of just paying attention, going to different, watching podcasts, doing our own research, which is just, blasphemy. But by the time we had sort of gotten, by the time COVID came around, I, as a father and as a husband, felt like, okay, it's at my doorstep now. Like all these things my wife had been telling me about, and all these things that this community of people that had slowly been sort of coming in closer and closer into our world, it seemed more real. And so that was where sort of what triggered my response, I think, was now it's at my doorstep, and I either have to, pay attention now for real. And maybe that's where a lot of people are, is like, they just don't want to hear. It wasn't that I didn't want to hear about it. It was that, I was just keeping an eye on it, but I wasn't taking it seriously enough to really do anything about it at that time. But the situation has become so gigantic for the world that it's like, how can you not? And like, so like when you're telling me about like your neighbor and like it's just too big, you're telling somebody like, look, you're a slave, you're being abused, you're, like you have a government that's killing you, and the entire system is designed to keep us from reaching our potential as humans. And it's so big that you just, it to me, I don't know how you don't want to know that or be aware of it. To me, knowing that has made me a stronger individual. It makes me, the fact that they're trying to bring it feels like 2020 again right now, because they're starting to implement masks and they're talking about this new shot and everything.
It just makes no sense.
Right. It angers me, right? But it fuels me more, because I'm like, are you kidding me? You're really going to try to do this again? So like now,
I know it's crazy. Just for the record, I'm going to slightly interject here. Sure. I had an article that came out last year. I actually thought it was almost past due then. I'm going to put it up here. It's in the Daily Skeptic, which is a great paper, I guess, whatever you want to call it. But basically, this is from a year ago. Is it time to accept that Omicron is not COVID-19? And I don't want to go into the whole thing, but very basically, Omicron is like Pluto. If this is Earth ancestral, and this is maybe Mars and Jupiter, whatever, Omicron is so far out of the orbit of the ancestral. This is SARS-CoV-2, not even original SARS, but the one in 2020. And so you can see the dates here. So this is actually a sui generis. It's its own Omicron, such as always were the common colds. I think there's a picture here. This is a textbook from 1999, and rhinovirus is number one. Coronavirus is number two named. This is all unknown, but it's the number two named source of the common cold as of 1999. And so in the before times, we always recognized that coronaviruses were the second most common cause by type. And obviously, Omicron is not lethal as say the influenza or COVID-19 original version. We'll call it classic SARS. And Omicron is way off here. This is not my chart. This is from nextstrain.org, which does genomics and whatnot. And so unlike the other Greek letters, it's way out here, and it's not really related. So it's its own thing. And I'm sorry for that diversion, but it's amazing, because I have to rewrite that article for today, and I didn't think I would have to, because it's so bleeping obvious that COVID-19 is, check my watch, is 4 years ago, 2019. This is not a thing anymore. People are not dropping down by like flies. I was in the pharmacy today, and woman's got a headscarf and a face mask, and mind, she couldn't read my card either, but it's like, and I brought it up. I said, are you still, I'm that guy, I'm going to be there 5 minutes anywhere while she searches for things. So making conversation, I said, do you still worry about this? And yep, And, all through the time I've talked to people at Staples and whatnot, young people, when are you going to stop wearing a mask? I asked then. I asked
Mhm.
kind of that same thing now. Um, and I feel like people really should know that one thing. I couldn't get that article published in any of the mainstream um, news
Mhm.
outlets and whatnot. And there have to be these alternatives. I'm part of Brownstone, and I've written for Daily Skeptic and whatnot, Washington Examiner. But these things are out there, but they never get the the spotlight that oh my god, new strain. Oh my god,
Yeah.
Joe Biden's
Oh
going to
yeah.
wear a mask. Oh my god, this. And everyone's like talking about that stuff. It's like, dude, I mean, it's not like I should rule the universe, but I should rule a really small part of the universe. um maybe it's a small country or something like that. But it's like, you know how hard is this, really?
Yeah.
And it's just kind of the emphasis. Anyway, leaving the science part aside, I want to get back to the art part. So I kind of like your Dr. Fauci song. Can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration there? What's the title? And how that been received? And have you had threats and whatnot, or cease and desist orders or anything of that sort?
Yeah, sure. So I released a song called "Sad Little Man." And I think that was late 2021. It was like the seventh song in this series that I was putting out, and I was getting every time I released a song, I'd get a little more aggressive in what I was trying to say, and I'd lean more into the messaging. And we were reaching a point where Fauci was looked at upon as like this godlike figure, and he was the science. And I felt like I needed to call him out, but I also wanted to try to do it in a way that um, was a little more clever than just saying Anthony Fauci is bad in a song or something like that. And so I wrote this song called "Sad Little Man," where really, if you listen to it, I don't mention Fauci and I don't mention shots. But you could even apply it to other sad little men that are in power. It's not really until you see the video that you're like, oh yeah, this is about Anthony Fauci for sure, because he's in the video. It's sort of this animated video that I don't know if you could pull up the actual music video still on YouTube, but the actual video is like an animated video of him going. He's like a snake oil salesman going through town selling off his stuff, and there it is. And so when I made that video, that sort of took me to a new level of dangerous misinformation spreader, I guess you could say, because YouTube had taken it down. It's back up now, but they had taken it down. They were hiding it from the search results, and people couldn't find it. And Wikipedia, soon after this song was released, deleted my page that had been up for well over a decade. And I could actually feel the censorship starting to really happen. Before this, I could sort of tell there was a little bit of suppression happening with my views and what I was putting out there. But this was like a clear step into the censorship zone where I actually, was seeing it happen in real time. But this was a lot of fun to make. I haven't had any, that's the kind of backlash that I've had. I haven't received any. I don't think that his clan would call me out for it, because it just would call more attention to it. And I think that's sort of something that works to an advantage on this side of the aisle, is that you can call them out directly and mock them and make fun of them. And even if it goes viral, which that video did, they're not going to acknowledge it because it would just give it more attention. Mm-hmm. And so, I use that to my advantage as an artist and put people's faces in my music videos. And I have a song about Joe Biden called Joe. I have a Trudeau song called This Just In. And it's important. I think that, it's not just about doing kitschy little songs, but it's a way to just mock these individuals in a clever way. And if you can do that and it sort of spreads out there, it's just another facet. It's another tool for people to use to say things. I think we can argue data and we can argue statistics and which doctor said what. But when you have something like this, it reaches people in a different way. I think it reaches people on an emotional level, And
You know,
if you don't want to sit there and look over data and statistics, at least like something about this may make you sort of think, in a different way.
mm-hmm. I like this just in.
This was a response to the Canadian protests, and that was another thing that was incredible to see because you could watch it happen in real time. I mean, the Canadian protesters were there posting their stuff as it was happening, and then for the news and for Trudeau to go on TV and twist the narrative as if you can't just go look at it yourself and call these people dangerous. You're sitting there seeing on Twitter in real time these bounce houses and peace circles and people singing "We Are the World" and like these beautiful unifying moments of humanity. And then Trudeau gets on TV and he's like, these people are extreme, dangerous, people. Yeah.
No, it's upside down world. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
I grew up in New York City, and pretty much there you have people on the left and people further on the left, and even back then there was, the only thing that mattered was the Democrat primary. Every now and then there'd be kind of an oddity liberal Republican that would get in, like John Lindsay as mayor. But for the most part, if you wanted to go anywhere in politics, you were a Democrat. And my brother, I have two brothers, the older one was very, very, very involved in politics. And so there was all this stuff, but I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but it winds up being a little bit like an echo chamber. I don't think they're that used to hearing alternate voices, even though they think they are on the cutting edge. So they're always like protesting against the man, as I was mentioning earlier. But I think it's really, they're oblivious to the fact that they are no longer protesting against the man. And even young people who are, there are a lot of young people pro Fauci and mask us up, keep us. It's kind of it's weird. It's like they still call it the left, but it's gone from, say, more interest in freedom and expressing yourself to kind of a cautionary safetyist dystopia. Anyway, so I'm going to leave that there. You can comment on that if you like. But where do you get your inspirations? And I mean, obviously they're in the news, but how does that work through the Brad Skistimas algorithm to come out as song? A lot of people see this stuff and they just want to like hurl invectives and curses. You coming out with songs. So, and I like your music too. I mean, people are not hearing it through this show. They're gonna have to go check it out separately as you break into song right now.
Yeah. So these songs came to me in a different way than I think creatively music had ever come before, because especially that first song that I wrote, God Help Us All, came about through prayer. And I had an 8-month lull where I released no music at all prior to that, because I just didn't know what I was supposed to say in this moment. And to me, I sat down and just sort of, I prayed on it for a little bit and was like, what do you want me to say in this moment? And that's how that song sort of came about. And I felt like it was sort of given to me, rather than in my previous, in my previous times in my career, is sort of like searching in my mind, sort of like, what do I want to say, is very, egotistical, right? About relationships and breaking up or whatever it may be. This was different. It felt like it was sort of delivered through me, and that's how I approached every one of these songs. Was I didn't sit down and say I need to write 12 COVID related songs. I let them come to me over the course of a year and a half, and I didn't rush any single one of them. I sort of found the inspiration, through prayer and just letting them sort of find me instead of me seeking them out, And I've really enjoyed that process. It's a different thing. I think that it comes across. I think that's one of the reasons it resonates so well. And it doesn't feel, too kitschy with things. There's actual there's some depth to it, but yeah, it's just been an incredible sort of turning as an artist, especially to go from, so basically, like, you start out as a songwriter and you write breakup songs and songs about girlfriends and love songs, and I've never written a song that didn't come from somewhere inside of me, and what I was going through. I went from relationship songs to the family album and writing songs because I was a dad. And that's, I wrote songs that I wanted my kids to listen to, that I wanted other parents to enjoy just as well, that had some sort of depth and value to it. And then I found myself in this moment where I was like, I don't even know what to say. This world is falling apart. And, and that sort of, that space gave me time to sort of, I think, almost like, turning in a caterpillar turning into a butterfly or something like that. It gave me time to sort of sit and turn into, for my mind to prepare itself to turn into this songwriter, and I think that everything that happened prior to this moment in my career was designed that way. I have 20/20 vision of my life now before COVID, of going, and I think this is true for everybody in this moment, in this time, that is fighting the good fight. I think that everything leading up to it was designed to make you this person right now, to be ready for this sort of battle that's in front of us, to say the things that you're saying, or to take the risks that you're taking. That to me is a pretty cool thing, because to me it's connected me more in faith and in my relationship with God.
So where do you go to church, if you care to talk about that, and how has that evolved? And I got an ancillary question here. People have always making fun of religious people as, praying to the big spaghetti monster in the sky or whatever. And, it's anti-science to be religious. I have actually thought many of those things at different times, growing up in New York and, leftist and all that kind of stuff. But, I think people have a journey, oddly enough, and I try to, stick to the science. I'm a doctor, I'm a medical doctor, but I was a chemistry and physics major, very science-y, mathematics. I like puzzles. I think there's an answer to many things, not everything. But it's a huge irony that the people who have hewed to actual science almost always have a religious backing these days. It's because they need basically the power to point out that there's not a moral relativism. There's not a relativism in science. You can't be the Dr. Fauci of 2005 and say, it's really important, not to have a vaccine if you already had the illness. Natural immunity is the best immunity. A vaccine is only one antigen, and there's no point at all in having a vaccine after the fact. And then to turn it to that guy, in 2020, et cetera, 21, and say, oh, you need a booster because, whatever. And, so to do all that, that is not science. That's Mr. Science, who he thinks he's the embodiment of science. And mind you, that becomes religion. That is, and so I always think that lately, I think always that it's not a matter of religion versus science. I think it's a matter of different religions that you always have to have. And even if you don't have it, it's kind of a joke. There's, people fall into two categories: people who fall into categories and people who don't fall into categories. I think that the people who thought they didn't fall into a category are in a category, which is that their new religion is Fauciism, and scienceism and safetyism, and they have, made their own, characteristic set of choices. Anyway, so that getting back to the question, if you choose, is how has religion played? And how was your religion or your church affected during COVID, and did it stay open, et cetera? And what were the kind of thoughts therein?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we go to a church just up the road from us. It's about 10 minutes away. But we, it's interesting. I don't know. it didn't really change much for us. I mean, we're in Texas, so nothing really changed as far as going to church. You would definitely just see more people with masks and things like that. But yeah, it is interesting to see people adhere to science as a religious sort of thing. When you saw during COVID, that what was it? It was a program where they were having clinics at churches, that it was called Faith in the Vaccine or something like that. That was a sort of an awakening, I guess, as far as, watching science turn into a new religion. And it's interesting seeing that, but it didn't affect our, all of this stuff for me has made me go dive deeper into the Bible, and dive deeper into prayer, dive deeper into, because to me, you can only go so far into science before there's just no explanation other than a creator, other than God. To me, it's like you'll always reach this point where you can explain this, and you can go down and you can keep getting deeper and deeper. But it's going to reach that point. And so to me, all this stuff is on many different levels. I'm bouncing around here in my brain because it's such a big question, but on many different levels spiritually, I think that this moment in time has woken up a lot of people to that. Not just not just me, but I think just people that weren't even going to church, or weren't even aware, or not aware, but just weren't even interested prior to the COVID era of having that relationship with God or going to church. I think a lot of people are waking up to it. And I think that, that is part of sort of the plan, I think. His plan, I should say, not the government plan, but
that's an interesting thing. I mean, the U.S. Was founded in a sense as kind of the embodiment of individual rights. And I think to that point, it was always assumed the monarch had divine rights, and this concept that people had inalienable rights, those were God-given, and it's kind of a crucial fixation, or it's a crucial lever point, fulcrum, that's the word, around which the apparatus of government persists, and or the choice of which type of government you're going to have. Obviously, we've seen kind of an overweening, overzealous, probing, frightened government come at you, and this is somewhat inimical to individual concepts. And a lot of the people who I think see themselves as liberals, at least they used to, but are not. They're not really looking for liberty or liberation in the sense of being free. Anyway, I'm sorry for that interlude, but as far as questions, I mean, it's top of mind now for whatever reason. Oliver Anthony, the pseudonym for the young artist out of North Carolina, I believe, musician. He's made it. A huge kind of popular appearance. What are your thoughts about his music? I mean, it's hard not to have a little bit of envy, because you've been at it longer in a way. What are your thoughts about his music, his presentation, and where he's going, and how it resonated? And I don't know, tell us a little bit about that phenomenon if you can.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch. I don't know him. I've never met him. We've never had any correspondence, so I don't know what kind of guy he is. But I do tend to naturally question anybody that shows up on the scene out of nowhere, because not just because I've been in it longer, but because I know plenty of other guys who have been in it longer. There is a group of us that have been speaking out, and we did it when it was at the most difficult time to do it. So for anybody to just sort of show up is interesting. So I don't really know how that sort of fell into play. It was interesting watching a lot of the influencers sort of leech onto it and push it out there as if there wasn't any other artist saying this stuff or speaking out or putting out an honest message. That was interesting to me. But the plus side of all of it is that hopefully it has whet the appetites of people to seek out more music with an honest, open message. That's a good sign of things. It's a good sign of things that a guy like that can get thrusted up overnight into the top charts of things, because it tells you what the actual tone is of the country. It tells you that even, these other artists that he's up against on the charts, or that any of us are up against on the charts, they have a machine behind them, that a real like machine of labels and lawyers and stylists. And it's all very, manufactured and produced and designed. And and there's a lot of money behind it. So when any one of us gets that sort of traction and it takes off and we get to the top of the charts, my songs have been at the top of different charts. And to me, it says more about, it's not about me, it's about us and what we're capable of doing when we get behind something, our ability to change culture just by voting with our dollars. It tells me the reality of, the fact that you don't have to put in all that money in this sort of fake manufactured production and billions of dollars into, music video and marketing, whatever it may be, to change the conversation. It just tells me that there's really a thirst for that kind of art, and that excites me the most. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes and what he does with his power and his situation. That's a lot of responsibility. It seems like he's kind of trying to find a way to position him in some sort of middle position. Whereas, I think a lot of people on the right took him and said, he's ours. And then he kind of came out and he was like, well, I'm not yours. And then, people get offended by that.
Yeah.
So it is interesting to see that. But to me, it's like, I don't know, you just have to be yourself in these moments, because you're not going to please everybody. He's already.
Well, as far as pleasing me, which is the most important thing to me, I actually find the song great. I think it's a great song.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I also like Jamie Johnson. I think I don't know if you know his music, country, similar. But I think both of them are troubled individuals, and they're going to have kind of the Dionysian pathway, of having ups and downs. And I think historically, I think he's pretty straightforward. He's had say drinking and drug problems and whatnot.
Yeah.
And those tend to cycle and then recycle. And so, it's its open thing, but I'm very happy the song is out there. I don't watch those videos where, somebody's like listening to music and gets shocked. I mean, there's a whole genre of people just kind of, waiting for their own shock face moment. But I've seen a compilation of those, and it is, touching to see that song get people of, seemingly all different, at least facially, or by tint, all different types of people. So I like that. And I think that the song actually has a great message, and has a little bit of humor in it. And I think his delivery is awesome. But we'll see. I think his, kind of like putting everybody in the same category of being north of Richmond, rich men north of Richmond, I think is a little bit facile, because I do think, I think there's a push and a secondary push in sports. Not that it's quite related, but in sports, I don't know if you watch NFL or NBA or whatever, but I do. And oftentimes it's the second guy who gets penalized. Some guy is like, elbows somebody in the crotch, whatever, and the other guy's like, boom, smashes him in the face. And who the guy smashed in the face gets thrown out of the game. But in point of fact, you were hit first. And I think that, the right, as it's said, or the conservatives, whatever, I think we have been hit, much more often,
Mhm.
and so forth. And when the reactions we have, like, we get penalized for. So like January 6th is the penalty phase for endless provocations, where, May 20th or whenever George Floyd, passed, and so forth, the riots thereafter throughout the summer, those are just like the whatever, that's
Mhm.
something that people are frisky, fine. And then when we, act out or whatever, it's like, that's the penalty.
Yeah.
Um, so, I think he's somewhat missing the point there by saying everybody's kind of in the same boat as far as he's concerned. But whatever,
Mhm.
I'm not looking for my politics to be, to taken whole form like a baby robin in the nest.
Mhm.
I'm not looking for that one entire worm
Yeah.
at a time. Anyway, we're kind of rounding out the hour. Closing thoughts, musicians you recommend, would listen to. How do people find you physically, or tours or whatever? What's the best thing for them to do to help you?
Yeah, you can check out 5timesaugust.com. That's my official website, and we've got CDs and records and even cassette tapes up there now. So I'm trying to bring back the physical format of music and make that something important. I think we've sort of stepped away too much into the digital realm, and happily walking towards the you'll own nothing phase of humanity. I think that we need to get back to sort of owning things and having these little cultural pieces in our homes that sort of speak to us. But yeah, you can check out my website. You can follow 5timesaugust on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Gab and Getter and Truth. I'm on all those things. And there's a great group of musicians that's out there right now. My buddy Joseph Arthur has been a songwriter for a long time. He was discovered by Peter Gabriel when he was younger, and actually saw him in concert when I was 17. So it's crazy to be here so many years later and be really good friends with him. But he's an artist who's spoken out, who's constantly releasing music, and my buddy is in a band called Faithless Town. That's another band that's rock music that's actually speaking out. And my friend Dickie Barrett and Pete Parada, who are both from bands that ousted them over not taking the vaccine. They're sort of in a super group now called the Defiant, and they are actual true rock punkers that are, true to what they say. And it's nice to see them on the scene now, because they just released their first single. And it's great. It's great to see so many artists in different genres. We've got, High Res and Jimmy Levy, who bring High Res the rapper. You got Bryson Gray the rapper. Jimmy Levy sings a lot of gospel music. You've got the Defiant, I mentioned, bringing back real rock and roll. You've got singer songwriters like myself and Joseph Arthur. Even there's a DJ called Tidy that we just did a benefit show for Maui together. Actually, most of these artists were on that benefit show, and Eric Clapton sent in a video to support that cause. And so that was really great. You're seeing a new community kind of come together and forge a new path in entertainment. And that's a really exciting thing to see. So yeah, check those artists out, and
All right. Well,
be
thank you.
sure to support them.
I'm going to post this, and maybe you can put a string of @ signs for the appropriate people and get them flagged so they can hear their names and spread the word around. So I like to leave with a shameless self-promotion. People like this podcast, videocast, and they want to help support it. I am not taking any money directly, but I do have a book called Overturning Zika. It for the same price of the book, you can get a picture of me on the front. This is a pandemic that people might have forgotten. Zika was Zika is an actual virus. It's like a dengue virus in the tropics, delivered by a mosquito. And the concept was that it brought babies with small heads, microcephaly, in 2015-16, Northeast Brazil. And then it disappeared, but the funding hasn't, and the quote unquote science around it hasn't. There's a whole research establishment that is in existence over this topic, and it just won't go away. And my I don't want to get too deep into this. It's not really related today, but my quote unquote conspiracy theory is that, and this is not much of one, because they're actually injecting and infecting women in Baltimore right now with the Zika virus in hopes of making a Zika vaccine. The premise of my book and my articles is that Zika is real and microcephaly is a real thing. It just so happens that one doesn't cause the other. It never did, never has. Dengue doesn't do this. And so any baby with microcephaly is a sad thing, and any family having that baby it's a sad circumstance, but just doesn't happen to be related to this dengue-like virus. Anyway, but there's going to be in short order, there's going to be a Zika vaccine that's going to be pushed out to the world, and no doubt mandated at a benefit to whom? Pretty much to the people who made it, and the people who, get money secondarily, kind of the regulatory capture cycle of big pharma, big public health, and then you're going to be one more vaccine, and there's no real purpose to it because the dengue vaccine has caused problems itself, and there's no reason to take on that additional risk. There's no reason to have these endless litany of vaccines. And just for the record, while we were talking, I had this example come to my head. I've been called anti-vax, and I'm not. I've given out thousands and thousands, maybe tens of thousands of vaccines over the years. And, I think the example I was thinking of is, if you're out in public and one guy, you might see this in the homeless now and then, some guy in the middle of the summer, he's wearing 5 layers of clothing, everything he owns, his parka, and he's got, 8 suits or whatever, and if you're just walking around in a bathing suit, it doesn't mean you're anti-clothing. You're wearing just the right amount of clothing for the circumstance. I'm not anti-clothing. Right. I try to pick out the right clothing for the right time, the right place. On a hot day, I might not wear it much. I don't, wear my parka into the pool. I don't wear my bathing suit in the winter. And so if you don't put on every single piece of clothing there is on earth at any given moment, doesn't mean you're anti-clothing. It means you're sane. And anti-vax is it depends. I think the rubella vaccine was very, very useful in preventing what had been a real phenomenon, rubella syndrome. 100% of the time, if you're a naive mother in first trimester, you get a baby with congenital rubella syndrome. We don't see that anymore. We don't see smallpox and so forth. And I think in regular measles as well, we don't really see that much anymore. So I think vaccines can work. The question is whether you need 20 of them and so forth. I mean, there's a yellow fever vaccine. I don't know how well it works or how dangerous it is. I've never given one because I don't practice in Ghana or in the jungles of Nigeria, whatever. It's no reason for it. So the fact that there is a vaccine does not mean everyone should take that vaccine all the time. So it's a little bit like my clothing analogy. There's a right thing for the right time, the right person, so forth, and not everybody's going to wear the same clothing. I'm not going to wear my kids' clothing. They're not going to wear mine. I'm not going to wear the same outfit that somebody in a nursing home wears. So these things all have to be structured individually. And I think people have lost sight of that. And when people kind of forget the individual, they wind up with the group. And that might be great. The hippies used to have communes, but communism is not such a great thing if all your personal choices have been co-opted. Anyway, that's my last word. If you have any last words, say now or forever hold your peace.
No, just thanks for having me on. It's been great to